You're now experiencing data with Brian O'Neill. Experiencing Data explores how product managers, analytics leaders, data scientists, and executives are looking at design and user experience as a way to make their custom enterprise data products and analytics applications more useful, usable, and valuable. And now, here's your host, the founder and principal of Designing for Analytics, Brian O'Neill.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Experiencing Data. I'm Brian O'Neill, and today we have Greg Nelson from Vidant Health on the line. Hey, Greg, how's it going?
Good afternoon.
I hope you're warmer than I am. I'm freezing already. I'm ready for Arizona here coming up.
No, it's a beautiful blue sky day in North Carolina.
All right, excellent. Well, today we're gonna nerd out to some analytics and health stuff today. So Greg is the VP of Analytics and Strategy at Vidant Health, and you've also authored the Analytics Lifecycle Toolkit. And I wanted to chat with you a little bit today about health data. There's a lot going on in this space, and my first question to you is I want to give you a chance to kind of introduce who you are and what you do, but I feel like healthcare is such a gigantic mess. It's just all over there's so many factors, like there's technology issues and ethics pieces and motivate, what do you call it? The motivations in place. Like a lot of the issues are not even technical. I'm sure it's the incentives that are in place. How do you live through this? Like, how do you make a difference when there's so many things that you can't control, I guess? What's your take? Do you just like, hey, we're only going to try to, this is our little hill over here, and we're going to win this battle knowing that we can't win the war? Or like,
no, we're absolutely about winning the war. I think for me, so I'm a recovering social psychologist, and one of the things that you talked about incentives. And I think for me, it's actually kind of like a puzzle, and you're trying to figure out what are the incentives at play, who is being motivated to do what. And as you've described, healthcare is incredibly complex. The people that pay for healthcare aren't always the people who receive healthcare, and people are incentivized or maybe even see part of the customer journey that leads to health and wellness. And so I view this big landscape of healthcare as being just right because of the level of complexity to keep it interesting for me.
Mm-hmm. Tell us about the part of the puzzle then that you're working on at Vidant. Like what's your role there and what's your puzzle piece look like?
Yeah, so it's a big puzzle. It's one of those 4,000 piece puzzles you get.
Right.
And half the pieces are missing, which makes it even more interesting. So my role is I lead the enterprise data and analytics team here at Vidant. And I have operational responsibility for all of our data systems, which include operational data systems, data movement systems, data capture and monitoring. I also manage enterprise information management, which includes things like governance, data governance, and data integrity, information security and privacy. Data science and BI falls under my remit. And one area that I just am always excited about talking about is our analytics product management and enablement group, which is helping make sure we build the right products for the right reasons, and we enable users to get the most out of those.
Got it. So the analytics product and enablement group, how do you I think you said something along the lines of like making sure they're building the right products for the right people. So how does one go about making sure they're doing that in an enterprise space?
So we've introduced product management as a discipline and a skill set here at Vidant. It's brand new. And really a lot of what I talked about in my book was how do you create, and much like what you talk about with your content, how do you create data products that are human-centered and usable? All too often, and I think you and I talked before about this, is this notion that, we build products. And, when I got here, we were right in the midst of decommissioning 10,000 reports, many of which were lightly used or never used. And so the question becomes, in a world of limited resources, how do you make sure we're actually building the things that matter and that will get used? And so product management focuses the light on use case centered approaches and design thinking to actually come up with and craft the right data products that start with empathy, right? And that's kind of what we have been trying to teach and do as part of our practice. And that extends, of course, with both data products, the durable data products that you might see, like uh, reports or AI models, but also to services. So how one experiences our enablement programs, for example, is a designed service. So it's been fun.
So, would you say is this a going from a unintentional, like sometimes I think about, I try to talk about the design process to non-designers when we're talking about design thinking as being very intentional about the outputs and the products and things and tools and applications we're building, as opposed to kind of like, well, this is kind of what emerged, and at the end we did a little bit of, we polish the turd, as it sometimes is.
That's right.
This is about being very intentional throughout the process. But I feel like sometimes with technical people, it can feel a little bit like hand wavy or kind of squishy. It's not real. It's not like very scientific. How do you build in a culture that wants to do this in a place that I assume you have a lot of technical people working, especially in the analytics area? How do you do that?
Well, I like your word of use choice there of being intentional, and we talk about that all the time. It's being purposeful and intentional and transparent about what we're doing. I think the another way to talk about that is we have been engaged in lots of activities over several years, and activities, as you know, don't always lead to outcomes, and so our focus is to try to avert the urgent in lieu of the important, and really focus on what are the outcomes we want to achieve. One of the ways we've done that is to try to use a use case, human-centered approach to actually designing the needs, fulfilling the needs for an organization. As an example, we recently did a gap assessment. There was some new technology being added on to our electronic health record. The business was quite concerned because they were moving away from older technology, which was tried and true for them. And they were concerned about none of the new applications would meet their needs, both in terms of operational workflows, but more importantly, in terms of the decisions they needed. They needed to be able to move patients around our system more efficiently than they've ever been able to do before. And so we approached that using design thinking to craft what as a bed manager or as a transfer nurse, I need to, and that helps define what is the decision support need, and then so that I can. In the so that I can piece was actually the most important, because that really focused on the outcome. Instead of saying, hey, I need a report, can you add another column and sort it by this, that only gets looked at once, we're able to then focus our energies on building the prioritized products based on the so what question. And to me, that was fun. And it changes the narrative so that and I think our technical staff, to your point, we like building things that people use. I know when I was doing a lot of technical work, that was motivating. I could see how many hits my site got, or how many times an AI model ran and predicted the right thing. That was fun for me. And I think our technical folks are no different than that. They want to see real utilization of data products.
Sure. I mean, it's just a lot more fun to work on stuff people care about, and you start to feel like you're making especially if you're in healthcare, right? And you could probably feel like a cog in this giant system. But when you start seeing how it makes a difference in someone's life, potentially literally in the healthcare space, I think it provides fuel to keep doing things that way instead of kind of falling back on the old way. And I liked how for people that maybe aren't familiar with this kind of Mad Libs template that you're talking about, as a role, I need to do X so that Y outcome happens. The so that Y part is so often missed. I think there's a lot of stuff that's built just with maybe the beginning part as a whatever, I want to do X, period, end of story. And there's no evaluation of what experience is needed in order to facilitate that kind of last piece. And that's so critical. And so is there an example you can give us, the listeners, about maybe the old way things were being done, and how when you tried this, like there was a particular learning moment that happened, or you saw a light bulb change for somebody, or you had a different outcome on the project because of this? I'm interested in that
Yeah,
before, after kind of.
yeah. I think the proof is in the pudding. So the jury's still out on the latest example that I shared with you.
Uh-huh.
But another example, and I won't go into the details too much, um, but historically, people deliver data, and I talk a lot about whole brain thinking and whole problem thinking. And when we understand the whole problem, the whole why about someone's job, we recognize pretty quickly why Apple was so successful with their initial iPod is that it didn't solve just the problem of storage, it didn't solve just the problem of finding music, it didn't solve the problem of listening to music on the go. It actually solved a whole system of problems for people. And so a good example is as most healthcare companies are facing today, there's a nurse shortage. We can't afford to lose the nurses that we have, can't hire them fast enough, and if we don't take care of them, it will continue to represent financial challenges for any health system who has to pay contract or traveling nurses, which we know that that's just a fact of life with changing demographics. And so before, our leadership was getting one report from one department, another report from another department, generating another report internally, and a fourth one was being calculated at the end of shifts, literally on the back of paper, and being keyed into another tool. Whole problem thinking is understanding those personas and actually working with them to understand. Tell us where you sit in this process and what part of that problem are you trying to solve. As we grow up as a system with almost 2 billion patients spread over 29 counties, we have a tremendous responsibility to our team members and our patients. And so helping them become more efficient and being human-centered increases team engagement, team satisfaction, patient satisfaction, but also it reduces the friction and accelerates the opportunity to make decisions in a more timely way. And to me, that's the fun part. That's the piece that keeps me coming back every day.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned product management is it a new function? Is that what you were saying?
Yes.
What was it before, and what was the indicator that made someone say, "Oh, we actually need this to be a separate organization"? Like, someone doesn't just wake up and say, "We need product now." How did that come about?
Well, so that was being driven primarily from me and begging and pleading for an additional resource that could focus on this. And the key message there was that we need to move from projects to products. And one of the manifestations of that, of what necessitated that move, was our customers expected an ongoing dialogue and a relationship about product maturity and durability and change, that our project teams, when we do, projects, they're defined for a reason. They have a purpose, they have a beginning, they have an end, and we're on to the next thing. And with data products, those that are being used hopefully will change because they've been in use and we get refinement. And so there was this reflection that because product durability wasn't being seen in the project deliverables, they would be done and then would be turned over to operational support for maintenance, is that voice of the customer never gets taken out of the life cycle of a product. And we thought that was such an important point to actually staff it accordingly.
Uh-huh. So does your product management group then, do they kind of lead this, human-centered effort to make sure these data products are built with the around desirable outcomes, with that focus on outcomes, or do they facilitate the design process and all of that, or is that coming more from your group? And how do you work with them?
Yeah. So the analytics product manager sits within my organization. And to be clear, we have one of those roles, right?
Right.
And so it's an evolution of understanding and maturity. But healthcare, as you've cited, is really complex. Oftentimes we do feel like a cog in the wheel because it is so complex and there's so many participants involved.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that's fun about that also is that it's a multidisciplinary problem. Our informaticians are working with our clinical frontline workers on workflows and optimizing those kinds of things. They're a part of that equation. Our application teams who are actually building interfaces are a part of that team, because those interfaces will effectively capture data that we'll be able to use later in data products or feedback to them. Of course, our clinical and frontline workers are critical components of that user story and being able to craft that. So the reality is it is a multidisciplinary problem, even though our analytics product manager is just one of those people driving the conversation to completion. It really is just a part of an overall strategy.
Sure. And do you have designers involved in this process as well, or not so much?
We have people who play those roles.
Uh-huh.
We do have a wonderful chief experience officer, and she has a whole team that does experience design. And so we tap into her group, who are absolutely amazing. But in our group, we're doing a lot of things through our bootstraps, as they say.
Got it. Can you tell me more about how you interface with them? And I assume, well, maybe incorrectly, but they're probably doing a fair amount of this research, potentially some of this frontline research.
So we do. So we have a number of bodies, governance bodies, a number of groups around the organization. Some are focused on providers, physicians. Others are focused on nursing workflows, others HR and internal shared services functions like HR and finance. And a good example is we're developing a program to allow patients to express gratitude to their provider and the organization. And so that team is actually creating an experience so that it reduces friction in the process, gets us really good transitions of touch points. So there's a lot of touch points in patient care, and the provider can't be expected to do all those things. So having the experience design folks actually building that patient-centered experience is absolutely key, and I think fun to be part of. If I could go give up my wonderful career in analytics, it would definitely be in user experience design.
Nice. Well, that sounds really interesting. And so this sounds good, but tell me about the journey to get to this point where you're, quote, doing things this way. Was there resistance to kind of this human-centered approach, this design thinking approach? Did it feel hand-wavy at all to some of the people you're working with? Did it have to kind of be pushed on them a bit before the value became obvious? Like, what was that like?
So recognize that it's a journey. We're not, at the destination
Sure.
today. We still sell every day as to why user-centered design is critical. The good news is our chief experience officer was here about 2 years prior to me joining. So she had already laid the groundwork and the language about how we design experiences for team members and patients. For me, I was simply coming on board and applying it in a different domain, that is in the world of data products. And so the ground was fertile. There's still a lot of confusion and misunderstanding of the difference between a product manager and, say, a project manager. There was a lot of work to help people understand the difference and why we need someone in those roles. And a great example is, when I first got here, Vidant has about 13,000 team members, and we were dealing with requests from 13,000 people. And one of the first things we did is a wholesale stakeholder analysis where we looked at who truly are our customers, and we narrowed it down to 18. It might seem like a big jump, but it's given us voice. It's given us the ability to have a conversation at the highest levels about what our priorities are, where should we be spending our time. And the reality is we went from 365 tickets, if you will, in backlog for requests to 0. And we did that in 9 months, all by focusing on the conversation about what's important.
Wow, that's a pretty significant. So this kind of dovetails my next question, but how does one get from 10,000 unused reports to, well, knowing that they're not used and not important, to actually being able to just get rid of them, which sometimes can be hard. It's sometimes really hard to take something away if there's one person using,
Yeah.
How did you do that? And same process, or like?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So one of the things we looked at is what was actually being used, and we our first pass at decommissioning was, if it hadn't been used in the last 24 months, we just turned it off. There was no conversation about it, and some of those have crept back in and said, hey, wait a second, I do this every 3 years for some accreditation. And we're like, great. So we rewrote it in a newer technology, and those were pretty minor. But you mentioned utilization, right? So how do we know whether something is successful? And I firmly believe that we need to design in and consider a persona that might be left out in a lot of our analytics products. And that is, as a analytics leader, I'm a persona, I'm a stakeholder in the design of that product. And we're requiring that all of our products heretofore are actually taking into account my needs as a stakeholder. I need to know who's using this, when's the last time they were using it, how long did they stay on pages, all the stuff that you would normally expect, but often gets left out of analytics products because we don't consider the actual analytic developer as being a key stakeholder in that. Knowing that we're going to design in, need to understand utilization and stickiness to data products, if you will, is critical. Sometimes there was a lot of work that went on to get us to an understanding of what was actually being used. But I think we've done a great job at actually shifting that. So now that all data products require some measure of some metrics associated with how we're going to measure their effectiveness.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Cool. I like that because it kind of takes away this, we can do something, throw it over the wall, and then check off that we accomplished something.
Yeah.
That's like the beginning of the journey, not the end, right? Like, okay, now
That's
it's
right.
there. Now we get to see if anyone uses it to do something. This is the beginning. It's not the end.
That's exactly right.
You're listening to Experiencing Data, the podcast that explores how design and user experience make enterprise data products and analytics applications more useful, usable, and valuable. Your host is Brian O'Neill of Designing for Analytics, designer, UX consultant, and advisor to the business leaders behind custom enterprise data products and analytics applications. For more information, visit designingforanalytics.com. If you're enjoying the show, help Brian out by rating it on iTunes. And now, back to Brian.
Let's shift over to ethics a little bit here. And you'd mentioned the word empathy earlier, which is really kind of the foundation of doing, creating human-centered experiences and products and solutions. So tell me about how you're approaching ethical AI and your playbook around that.
Yeah. So this is one of the areas that I think is just fundamental to what we do. And at the end of the day, I tell people, our mission is to deliver data that people can trust in a way that's usable and actionable, built on a foundation of data literacy and dexterity. That trust in the first part of our core mission is essential. If I deliver data that's wrong or inconsistent, or somebody shows up with a different report reporting a different metric, then I've lost all credibility. And the same is true with AI models. Is what was the process? And my staff will probably cringe when they hear me say that. But I often say, if we develop something in a robust and repeatable manner, then the outcomes are often robust and repeatable. And so we've taken a risk-based approach to assessing how we validate every data product that we deliver. If, for example, it has broad reach, broad implications, or a large number of patients that could be affected with a decision that is based off of the data that we deliver, that's high risk. If it's a one-off, which we hope we don't ever do, but sometimes we do what are called investigative research programs, where we're just investigating the order of magnitude. So it just has to be directionally correct. Then we'll do a different level of so we quantify that in the risk matrix. And depending on where you fall in that risk matrix, then the level of validation that goes into that becomes critical. That serves as input to our AI playbook, whether we're engaging in an outside vendor to adopt one of their commercially available AI models, whether we've developed it in-house or we've acquired a model through a partnership or collaboration from another organization. They all follow the same core principles, which is we will do proactive testing against algorithmic bias. So I wrote a paper back in the fall for the North Carolina Medical Journal on ethics and AI, and really focused on this idea of algorithmic bias and how do we prevent that in getting into our data products. And I think it's a critical thing. We'd rather do fewer things and do them well than do lots of things and fail.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the challenges you have on the non-technical side of of using some of these more predictive and prescriptive technologies at Vidant?
Yeah, so the number one rule that I have when we go to develop a predictive model is that we have consensus in our workflows, processes, best practice protocols, whatever you want to call it, for how we respond to something given a target variable. So let's say we're trying to predict something, a patient is septic or not. Pretty important thing to get right, but more importantly is what do we do about it from a clinical perspective if we don't do it right? And fundamental to any development of an AI model, we must agree clinically on what is the course of action to take. If we don't have that, then we really ought not to be even talking about a predictive model, because we're going to see variation of response, and our predictive value will continue to be eroded by inconsistent variations in process. And so I think that's probably one of our biggest challenges. The second is the identification of high value use cases. And part of what we're trying to do is elevate the understanding of what can AI do for us. For example, recently I presented to our senior leadership team on what we're doing in AI. What is it? What are its implications? What are the high value target use cases? And there's lots of things that we could do, but which ones are the things going to matter? And the way we think about those is those that are aligned to our strategic priorities are the ones that we're going to be focused on. But getting people to put energy into validation, into input as to feature selection, all of those things requires conversation in a new language. And I think that's one of the things, if I could claim a superpower, it would be the ability to actually bridge the conversation between business and technical folks. But there's a rate limiting factor there with me, and so that's not a universal language that either our business speaks tech or our technical people speak business. And so I think we just have to strive to get better and better and better at that, so that we can make sure we're bridging those gaps. Because you can't do it. I think any organization who builds models and thinks it's a technical exercise is gonna fail.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and the skill set here. So how do you go about scaling this, right? So that you don't have, only one person that can do this. Is this a training issue? Do you train the technical people to get better at doing this, the data people, your data scientists and analytics people, or do you train the product and business line frontline managers to come to a data group with more informed problem statements and things like that? How will you scale that?
Yep, great question. So as part of our analytics enablement program, we've actually developed a curriculum around question design, really intended for our business people who want to be able to ask questions of data, but don't need to get into the technical details. So I actually think it's both, right? So we've got to make sure that people can ask questions, and our chief operating officer for the health system and I are going to be rolling a program out to actually help people create some awareness of why this is important, the fundamentals of question design, and being able to get to the crux of an issue. You can ask a question and get 10 different answers depending on how the person that actually interpreted that question, could be all over the place. And on the other side, as you point out, the technical people have to get better. We have to get better. I'll classify myself as a technical person. Have to get better at extracting need in a way that is understandable, interpretable, and really actionable from a technology perspective. And it's like teaching someone a language they never knew they needed. There's a lot of resistance to it.
What kinds of resistance?
Well, from the technical side, we often hear, why can't they just tell us why can't they just answer the questions? Why can't they just tell us what they need? But it's much like Steve Jobs. If he had asked people what they wanted in a mobile phone, they probably would not have described the iPhone, right? And so it's a little bit of creativity that is not typical of the skill set of a traditionally technical person. And I hear these dialogues all the time, and it's really quite comical, because no matter what, I spent 20 years in consulting, and the conversation was the same pretty much every organization. Business people would say, I need X, and the technical people would say, well, send me your requirements, and the business person would say, well, tell me what's possible. and this would be this circular conversation.
Yeah.
And we introduced design thinking into our consulting practice about 5 years ago as a way to bridge that conversation. It was tremendously successful. Once you start talking about empathy, it's really tough for technical people to revert back to send me your requirements because you've completely changed their dialogue.
Yeah, the power of the why question, and I fully agree with you on that, and I think for technical people listening to this, I think you have to check it at the door. If you make the assumption that someone necessarily knows what they actually need, because they may be requesting, it's like the leading indicator, right? They don't know. It's the analogy, like the cast on the arm. Doctor, I need a cast. And your response should not be, okay, what color should it be and how thick would you like it? That's not it's, well, no, we're going to do a diagnosis. Why do you think you need a cast? Well, my arm hurts. And you have to go through a diagnosis there. And some people will be better at saying, no, I actually really do need a cast, and I can tell you why I need a cast, and here's the problem space. That sounds great, I think, for a technical person to receive that type of request. But that's like at least in my work, that's a myth that even with my own clients, they don't come to me with that well-formed of a problem definition. It needs to be unpacked. So whether you're doing that work, if you're on the data science or analytics side, or if you're on the product management side, somebody needs to be doing this work. And I think it's mostly it's a team sport. It's not, you can't have a conversation with one person anyways. And you definitely can't have a good product conversation without talking to an actual end user as well. But we have to check those assumptions at the door that someone actually knew exactly what they needed. And it sounds bad in a way, like when you say it that way, like, well, this is your whole department and you don't know what you need. But we make assumptions about what the other person knows about our space and our domain, and what you might think is totally obvious that isn't to somebody else. And so I think this whole design, the design process helps us be objective and open ourselves up to not knowing, and then getting to a place where we start to know, and we carefully prototype quickly to fail quickly, and then learn, moving forward without, doing a giant technology investment in something that may not pay off. And then it doesn't build trust, and people don't trust you, not so much that you're a liar and a cheat, but like, I can't depend on this group to deliver goods. It takes forever. And whatever I get back, I can't use it. It didn't really help. And by the way, it's too late now. Like, I'm already on to the next thing. It's like, whatever, just throw it in the report drawer and shut it. 10,001.
That's right. That's right. That's right. It's interesting. So I'm going to steal that analogy about the cast, because that's perfect for what we often encounter, and certainly will resonate in this environment. You mentioned something and I want to add to, which is this idea of failing fast. That's a cultural mindset shift that I think has been challenging for us as an organization as well. Is, hey, we're going to do a project, we're going to be successful, here's what the measures of success are. And oftentimes the measure of success are, we did it on time, on budget, within scope. And being able to create an innovation culture where learning is the measure of success is absolutely a mindset shift that is really hard. I don't know what your experience has been.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, no one really wants to spend money and time and resources on that, unless it's a really enlightened leader. But I think deep down inside, they, the smart executive knows that innovation doesn't have, you don't bat 900 when you're doing innovation. What I mean? You bat like 200, you suck. It takes a long time let alone to build in a repeatable process to do innovation. That means that you obviously went through some type of fail process, and then you learn and you inform it going forward before you can have a pattern of doing it. So, and it's hard to swallow that. And I think that's why starting small, using small projects, I like using small teams, and you build it out that way through a little kernel, and try to spread it that way, as opposed to implementing it top down we're now going to do innovation, that's our mission, it's like, good luck, it doesn't generally work to try to shift the whole organization. So find a small project. I think finding the right minded people for that, but you also have to provide a runway for that group to do it. And someone has to say, this might not work, but we can use design thinking to help us fail a little bit earlier and to know what we learned from it and then push it forward so that people understand why is this not working? And then you can factor that in maybe to the next pass. And as opposed to just like, this project is now 9 months behind. No one really knows why. And now all we're measuring, at least in my experience, we're measuring code check-ins and bug reports that we've squashed and commits and how many sprints did we finish. And we are using Agile, so we're doing something right. And it's like, well, all we're doing now is measuring engineering activities. Because we're totally disconnected now from whether or not any of this is going to matter. And it's easy to measure that, right? Because you can count the bugs, you can count the sprints, you can count the number of Git commits, and I don't know if that's how it is on your end, but it's tough. It's not easy.
Yeah. The classic adage is, tell me how someone's measured, I'll tell you how they behave, right?
Right.
If we measure by lines of code, guess what? I'm not going to be efficient in my code.
Yeah. So given where you are now in your experience here, is there something you would have changed since you kind of got into this whole this data space and health? Like, if you were starting over 10 years ago, is there something you would change about where you are now or how you approach your work?
That's an existential question, isn't it?
I wish I had done it this way, or something like that.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I don't think I would have changed anything.
Mm-hmm.
I may have spent a little less time on learning new things,
mm-hmm.
and perhaps more time on developing deeper relationships with some of my customers.
Uh-huh.
I think the human-centeredness of what we do is just so critical. So that's probably the one area that, how are they incentivized? What keeps them up at night? So I could have been a better designer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, thanks for sharing that. I kind of like to. This has been a super great conversation. I really appreciate you sharing these insights about what's going on at Vidant and some of the nuggets from the analytics lifecycle toolkit. Is there one thing you would like give as a takeaway from this conversation, or that you'd like to share with people listening? People in the data science field, analytics leaders, technical product managers. Is there something they should walk away from that you think is important?
You can't. I think the big one for me, and this. I'm acutely aware of this challenge for myself. Is you cannot underestimate the power of collaboration and multidisciplinary perspectives,
mm-hmm.
and getting buy-in. And that's really what design thinking is all about: is getting that understanding, that empathy, truly understanding how to walk in someone's shoes. I see so many analysts throughout the world, even in Kaggle contests, where we want to apply the technical processes and procedures and code without truly thinking through. And I did this in my class at Duke. I taught machine learning in the graduate program at Fuqua School of Business. And people view data science oftentimes as a technical journey. That we need to understand the features and we need to understand what methods are appropriate. And let me see if I can get the model fit statistics to work right. And even if you spend just a little bit of time answering some fundamental empathy type questions, even if you don't have an opportunity to interact with those, but just put yourself in the shoes of someone and try to empathize. How am I going to use this data? What is my mindset? What am I thinking? I think when I see teams that do that in my courses, we do a lot of team projects. They're far more successful than the people who view it as a technical exercise. And feature selection is really all about understanding behavior. And the other thing that I encourage people to do is learn as much as you can about behavioral economics as possible. Understanding incentives that drive the world around us are essential to being successful in it.
Awesome. Well, there's some great inputs there for furthering your career if you want to. And I would second everything you said here. If there's one thing that I've heard from most of the leaders in the data and analytics space, with regards particularly to data scientists is finding this other missing skill set, which is not the technical skill set. It's understanding the human behavioral piece and really being able to connect the fact that your technical work does have this soft skill stuff, the qualitative aspects here, the learning about human behavior very much has relevance into feature selection, as you said, and building models that are actually going to produce some type of useful outcome. So I full +1 to everything you just said there.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today, and excited about the work that you're doing, and look forward to developing more evangelists throughout the community at large.
Cool. Well, thank you. And how can listeners follow your work? Are you on Twitter, LinkedIn? Where are you at?
Yeah, LinkedIn is probably the best place. My Twitter handle is @GregorySNelson, and it'll be fun to connect with other like-minded folks.
Great. Awesome. Well, I will definitely put a link there to your both of those places. And again, we've had Greg Nelson here today from Vidant Health, VP of Analytics and Strategy. Thank you for coming on Experiencing Data and sharing your thoughts.
Thanks, Brian.
Cool. Cheers.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Experiencing Data with Brian O'Neill. If you did enjoy it, please consider sharing it with the hashtag #ExperiencingData. To get future podcast updates or to subscribe to Brian's mailing list, where he shares his insights on designing valuable enterprise data products and applications, visit designingforanalytics.com/podcast.